Pessoal, bom dia. Eu estou aqui com a pesquisadora Irina-Maria Manea, que ela tem pesquisas muito interessantes relacionadas aos mitos, principalmente uma que eu quero muito trazer aqui para o canal, que é relacionado à questão da percepção do metal, do heavy metal, essa participação com a questão da temática nórdica, então a gente vai abordar um pouco disso aqui na entrevista. Inclusive, ela administra algumas disciplinas, ela não é professora da instituição, mas ela administra algumas disciplinas na Signum University. E aí nós vamos debater aqui alguns desses temas relacionados a esse universo, que a gente sempre está vendo por aqui, como também com outros profissionais, mas a gente vai entrar agora com um tópico novo que vai ter esse outro lado também musical. Irina, thank you so much for being here doing
My
this
pleasure to be
interview.
here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thanks so much for accepting this. So I would like to start. How to start your interest for searching about this topic? How do you meet Norse mythology, Viking Age? How is your beginning in this saga?
All right. Yeah, I think you could call it a saga. So I come from Eastern Europe. I come from Romania. I'm currently residing in Germany. I could say that my interest in Old Norse studies started quite late. So I'm not one of those people who started learning about this stuff in high school and all of a sudden, yeah, this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. It didn't start out like that. So I started studying at the University of Bucharest. I have a bachelor's degree in European history as well as Germanic philology, where I studied English, German, and Swedish. And then in my master's degree, I was actually interested in something else. I worked quite a lot on the late Roman Empire. I was kind of convinced I would go on doing that because it's something the university really has a strong tradition in, and yeah, I think I would have had more chances of really staying fixed in the system, steadfast in the system, had I continued with the Roman Empire. But then when I decided to pursue a PhD, I thought, I want to do something different. Everyone is studying. I mean, everyone doing ancient or medieval history in Romania, they're either doing Roman or Greek history, or if you're into medieval studies, you are basically limited to this Eastern European space, like the Ottoman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, and so on. And I was like, I want to do something different. I want to do something people here don't do. And back in the day, so we're talking 2013, and I started my PhD, because I finished in 2017. Back in the day, I had a deep interest in Swedish and Norwegian as well. I used to teach these languages as well, and I was also kind of a metalhead. I mean, I am still a metalhead, but back in the day, I was really, really into going to concerts and just belonging to that scene and community. So I thought, I didn't really have the resources to study like something traditionally Viking, like Viking archaeology or something like that. That I just simply didn't have the resources. And I thought to myself, yeah, I could combine these things. And so I decided to investigate the way Norse mythology is received in the lyrics of some Viking metal bands. So I actually started out with reception history, like the way Norse myths take shape in a modern world as well. But then I gradually kind of like came back to the more classical approaches to Old Norse studies. For example, right now I'm trying to do some work on burial mounds and the way burial mounds are represented in saga literature. So it still has to do with reception history and memory studies, but I kind of like started the other way around. So I think I could define myself as cultural historian because I worked and still trying to work interdisciplinary, which can be both a blessing and a curse. It can be a blessing because you gain so many perspectives from different areas of studies, trying to bind together and create something new. But it's also a curse because you don't really fit anywhere. And right now, among my modules that I teach at Signum University, I deal with magic, especially magic in the Old Norse sagas. I also have a class on pre-Christian religions and an upcoming class on women in the Viking Age. So I'm kind of like a generalist nowadays. I can't really say I specialized in something in particular after my PhD. It was very difficult to find a position, so I'm kind of like in this very weird place where I'm both a public historian doing the cultural like sharing of these academic inputs to a larger audience. I have this project on YouTube. It's called Shield of Schooled. And at the same time, I have this thing at the university, and I'm also a part-time history teacher. So I am all over the place. It's very hard to stay coherent, but I really like Old Norse studies, and I'm going to continue pursuing them no matter how difficult it gets. So that's briefly said what I've been doing. I don't have the classical story where, you go to a university where Viking archaeology or Old Norse studies are really, really in and have a great tradition. And I'm trying to do something worthwhile given my circumstances, which haven't been the most favorable.
Fantastic. And I think we have a very interesting interview here because I love heavy metal, and people that will be in the channel like so much that you'll be learning a lot of things about how Vikings inspired many
Yeah, I
bands.
must confess, after writing my PhD, I ditched the topic altogether. So I didn't do anything on the topic. Since 2017. I am trying to rewrite it a little bit now in the hope that I'm going to get it published in a different form, because it's already uploaded on academia.edu, my thesis. So basically anyone can read it. I'm trying to rework it a little bit for a larger audience. Let's see if it works out. But after finishing my PhD thesis, I was like, I don't want to deal with this like ever again. I just think I said everything I wanted to say in that thesis. So that's why I came back to the more traditional things like reading Old Norse texts and just archaeological reports and whatever.
Yeah, I completely understand. And it's one of the most incredible things when we study Norse mythology or Viking Age, is the represents that they have in nowadays, that the most influence many authors, many bands, many things. And in your vision, how we can say that this starts, and how the importance of Norse mythology for many aspects that they inspired these aspects of in actual societies.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we're dealing with a process of cultural reception. I think it started out in the Middle Ages. So we can't really say, it started with the Romantics in the 19th century because they were obsessed with these themes. It started much earlier. So ever since medieval Icelanders started writing the sagas, we can say that we are dealing with the reception of these elements, because we're dealing with Christian authors writing about say roughly 400 years after the events of the Viking Age, and they were biased in their own ways. But at the same time, I think they should be credited quite a lot with the fact that, for example, our most comprehensive sources come from these Christian authors who wrote them down, the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda by Snorri Sturluson. There was a very deep interest with the Icelanders to show that they had a longer history, that they had a history at all. And in the Book of Icelanders, the author Ari Þorgilsson actually says that he clarifies that the purpose of writing all these stories is to show that they did not come out of nowhere, but that they were very much linked to the history of Scandinavia. And after the Middle Ages, there has been interest in, generally speaking, in the ancient Germanic past. We can see that during the Renaissance, we can see that during modern times, and especially during the Romantic Age. So 19th century Romanticism started out as this reaction against the rationality of the Enlightenment, and it was a time when authors were trying to revive the ancient past, whether the Nordic past or the classical past or whatever, They tried to revive it in the sense that the present was no longer satisfying, so we have to go kind of like back to the origins. There was this myth of the golden age, among many other things, and people were very, very fascinated. They became very fascinated with all things Vikings and Germanic peoples in general. Victorian Englishmen also were fascinated with this. There was quite a lot in the terms of the beginnings of Old Norse studies at the time. So I would say it was a continuous process that goes on until nowadays, where we also have this resurgence in metal music, in film and television, in computer games, and so on. And this can also be interpreted as some form of communicating with the past. I would say it is partially a form of escapism when you're trying to kind of like see the past as your place of refuge when the present seems too overwhelming. And secondly, I think it's also a quest for ancestry. It has become quite common nowadays, for example, to have your DNA tested in the search of whatever origins, ancient origins. I think it forms part of the same picture. It is our desire, our explicit desire to go back to what we perceive as the origins, to try to discover ourselves or our identities a little better, and try to communicate with the past. There is also the part of entertainment, of course. There is this fascination with hypermasculine images, for example. It's something you can see very often in metal studies, and also in the television series such as Vikings. It also has to do with a larger cultural phenomena of postmodernism, where we don't really have these grand narratives any longer. So our idea of identity has split very much, and in this quest of figuring out who we are, we kind of like try to resort to more ancient peoples in the hope that we're going to discover who we are, using them as some sort of image.
Oh, that's interesting. And we have some aspects that we can saw that some figures are sometimes are very, very contemplated by many histories. We saw, example, the elves, dwarves, Valkyries, and what we can say about this preference for these figures, and sometimes they are so intense in detriment for in compared to God's example of like Odin or Thor. We saw that we have the figure Norse gods in many authors and many series, but these figures sometimes appear much more in many aspects. And what it is we can say about that?
That's quite interesting. And surprisingly, we can draw a parallel between the interest that we have in such creatures and what people back then used to think, because yes, of course, most of the material that comes from, let's say, from the Viking Age, but filtered through the Christian authors of the Middle Ages, they are mostly about narratives regarding the gods, right? There isn't much written, for example, on such beings such as the Disir or the Fylgjur, the so-called fetches, or any sorts of magical beings that would have been much closer to the commoner. We have a couple of references about this in older texts. We have, for example, the so-called landvættir in Icelandic sources, the spirits of the land. So this idea that nature itself was populated with all kinds of spirits that you cannot see, but you know they're there, you know they can be helpful, and you know they can be maleficent as well. So it all depends on how you behave. There was this closeness to nature and to the natural elements back then, and then nowadays I think we're trying to recuperate a bit, to recover a bit from that image, because we're trying to build a connection. I think the gods, yeah, they're fine, but like they're there, they're far away from us, and beings such as the ones you mentioned and many others we find every once in a while in the old sources, they tend to be a little more, a little closer to us, a little more connected to us, I would say. So it is quite a bit an attempt to recuperate the larger mythology of that time and place. Like the elves, for example, they're a fascinating example. Nowadays, they have been filtered through the works of Tolkien. We have a very clear image what elves are and what they look like. I think that played an important part as well. So we cannot think of elves in the same way someone living in the 8th or 9th century would have thought about elves, because we don't really have a representation, an accurate representation of what an elf would have looked like. But we do know that they would have been important. They would have been important for the common people as some sort of guardian spirits, guiding spirits, and so on. So on the one hand, like I said, it's a way to recover the broader imagery and mythology. But on the other hand, it is in a different way. I mean, we want this connection, but at the same time, it is still supernatural to us. I mean, we do know when to draw the line between what's rational and what's supernatural, unlike people from the 9th, 10th century who were not really aware of that, or they didn't really care much about that, because everything would have been imbued with this feeling of supernatural and magical back then.
And so we can say that some aspects from, example, the new religions like the Heathenism, the Azatra, and many others are part of this new begin for comprehension to the Norse mythology from nowadays, and we can say that they are turning this and how can I say a biggest explosion for Norse mythology. They turn Norse mythology again in importance from new types of religions that are very connected to Norse mythology.
Yeah, Norse mythology is very popular because it has been popularized massively by J.R. Tolkien, who also drew on older sources from the 19th century, and of course from medieval sources. So it did have from the very beginning this quality of being popular, and the whole phenomenon of heathenry, new heathenry, Ausatru, like you said, it's also part of the fragmentation experienced by our society nowadays. This desperate attempt to build communities and to figure out new identities. So this very acute need to go back to the past, which is both endearing and problematic, I would say. In the case of Nordic new heathenism, we have different strains. You have something like you would have in Iceland, the Ásatrúarfélagið, the Ásatrú Association, which is very much oriented to this more practical, artistic meaning or dimension of religion. It is something that in scholarship is called art religion. So they are very much aware that they cannot recover the religion of the time because there is simply too little material and the material is too fragmented. They're aware of that, and they're trying to create some sort of playful artistic movement, maybe singing some of the poems from the Poetic Edda, and gathering and sharing a common experience, spiritual experience, and so on. So I think that's an endearing experience overall. But then you also have the more radical approaches. You have ethnicist heathenry, claiming a reconstructionist approach, in the sense that, yes, we do know what the ancient religions looked like, and we are going to take ad literam whatever we find in the texts and reconstruct the past, and also combine it with this idea of a Germanic identity, which is it draws very much on what has been done in the 20th century when this radical wing approach to Norse mythology and the Viking Age was developed. So I think we should pay attention to what kind of movements we're dealing with and what kind of concepts they're operating with, because they're not all the same. like the ethnicist approach is generally something I think most new heathen movements are trying to distance themselves from, because they're extremely ethnicist and racial, and yeah, so it's the best idea is to distance yourself from it and just keep the spiritual dimension of what you're doing. But then we also need to be aware that this radicalized approach of the Germanic past is still happening nowadays.
That's interesting. And we can see how much these are very accurate in some aspects, like we have some, how can I say, some products that from that like movies like The Northman, that was very popular
Yep.
in many aspects of the Viking Age, and we have the books of Tolkien, and how much these are present in these titles of how can I say, um in this, oh my god, I want to use a term for that, in this type of medias that was incorporated in many aspects of Viking Age, how we can say that they are very useful for us comprehending this type.
Okay, so you mean if the new receptions are useful for gaining access to the ancient past?
Yes.
Oh wow. Okay, so you mentioned The Northmen, which is a film I actually enjoyed, which doesn't really happen. I mean, I'm not a fan of the Viking series, for example. I didn't even have the patience to watch it to the end, but that's like my personal problem. The Northmen did quite a good job at representing the past, I would say, because Robert Eggers is one of the directors who very, very fascinated with presenting stuff accurately and as detailed as possible. The archaeology was there. I really enjoyed the elements they added, from the tortoise brooches to the way the armor was made, and also the helmets. I think that was very accurate. So if you want to get into that sort of detail, I would say that, yeah, the film definitely deserves a 9 out of 10, so to speak. I also enjoyed a lot the way mentalities were reproduced in this film, although imaginatively. I think there are several sequences where a sort of dream vision is presented, with the world tree Yggdrasil appearing, and this like sort of the journey into the afterlife, or at any rate some sort of vision which kind of reminds of the visions that we see in the Poetic Edda, including the one with the Volva, the prophetess, who describes to Odin the cosmogony and eschatology. In terms of mentality, the whole vengeance cycle, I think it was again quite well described. He drew a lot on Icelandic sources, and it could be seen in details such as there is a scene I really like where he fights a revenant, so this sort of Icelandic zombie guarding its treasure, and there are very, very specific details he actually took from the saga, such as beheading this revenant and placing the head between his buttocks. That is taken directly from Icelandic literature, and these are things I really, really enjoy. What I didn't enjoy, but then again, I think it was his attempt of translating a saga on screen, which doesn't really work that well, because sagas tend to be very, very plain in terms of character building. They don't really have character building. They have nice plots. They have very complex plots, with all these stories about vengeance and kinship, and complicated family relationships and so on. But character-wise, they don't really offer that much. So I understand why some people didn't like the film, because the characters were quite plain. I didn't really see character development anywhere. And there was also the problem of, again, using some tropes in this film that were very much used and abused throughout history. The myth of the berserker, for example, which again is something that I don't think we can ever escape from. The berserker, so these very hyper masculine figures appearing on screen and dominating the screen. And you can see like Alexander Skarsgård there, he was really this bodybuilder type, and yeah, Vikings didn't really look like that. So they were neither bodybuilders nor on steroids, but at any rate, I understood why he approached the film that way. I don't think there is a good way of approaching Viking history in a popular way without reusing, recycling these tropes, because the point with cinematography is not to be historically accurate, but to try to make a connection with what the audience already knows about. So Berserker is a theme that that appears quite a lot, but because he also insisted on battles and on this whole idea of masculinity, and because I think all the actors used were white, so there wasn't really any diversity in terms of, you know, racial representation or so on. I can understand that as well. I mean, he tried to portray what was happening in Eastern Europe. He also tackled the topic of slavery and so on. So yeah, I didn't really expect a great deal of racial diversity, but that's just you know, it has to do with the geographic region he decided to place the action in. But such elements were then taken by these white supremacist movements and augmented in such a manner that the film turned into this this sort of idolatry of this masculine trope once again. So it is a film that is very good, but at the same time it can be very easily instrumented by radicalized and right-wing people by just resorting to these elements that have to do with this militaristic aspect of the Viking Age. So it's, yeah, both in light and shadow.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say about these works, because I think in many aspects this type of work are very specific for a type of public. And I think the Northmen caused this estrangement and in some point a negative perspective from people that don't understand, because they don't explain how much this is the Viking Age. We saw the Viking Age from people that understand that period, not for persons that don't understand. And when people come to the cinema, they saw this type of work. They saw that, oh, I didn't like this. Is so excessive and masculine that many feminists say about this movie, that they don't like because of that, because is a masculine toxic thing. And I hear many things about this movie, but I think it's a thing that it's more for related to not people that not have a knowledge about that people that understand and comprehend what is in the scene and in the movie.
Yeah, I think it had a lot of positive sides as well. I mean, from the manner in which these archaeological details were portrayed to mentalities as well. I mean, yeah, of course, Vikings did have a militaristic mentality. I mean, Viking in itself was a social identity built on this idea of going raiding and trading. Also, they're also very opportunistic, so this is not talked about enough. So whenever they had the chance to avoid war, they would do it as well. But then again, we do have this whole heroic thing going on, and you can't really avoid it when you discuss or when you make a film about Vikings. The only problem is when you focus too much on it. But then again, you could wonder, yeah, how would a film be interesting about, you know, showing women who are weaving in a hut? I mean, who wants to see that? And although the topic in itself, I mean, to me personally, is much more interesting than Vikings going raiding some helpless monasteries on the coast of England. It's more interesting to me to see these activities that are unseen on screen. But then you have to make these considerations. Unfortunately, who is going to watch that?
Yeah,
It's hard to find a balance between the two of them.
yeah, that's true. And for our next topic is we enter in this part of that were related to music and the Norse mythology. How we can say these aspects of knowledge about the myths that involve the Norse mythology and the myths that involve the folklore and many aspects that are very, very closer to the lyrics of bands and the concept for many aspects for since the 80s bands to the actual bands, how we can say about that.
Yeah, well, Norse mythology became very popular in a strain of music that we generally classify as extreme metal, although there have been a couple of more, let's say, mainstream bands who also resorted to that. Like we have the classical example of Manowar or so on. But Norse mythology was used in order to build identity in heavy metal. It was used, or it began with this strain of black metal. So it was in at the end of the 80s and at the beginning of the 90s. Um, there was this sort of explosion of genres, if I might say so, in the sense that a lot of things started to be developed, and a lot of bands were starting to look for what they could do different, in a different manner. And we have first and foremost the development of black metal. So black metal developed as a reaction to death metal. Actually, all these extreme strands developed as reaction to something else. So black metal in Norway developed as being this movement that was very much anti everything. It was anti societal rules and anti Christianity, especially because Christianity was seen as being representative for the modern world. So it was a very anti-modernist movement. It was a very destructive narrative, so to speak, and it was something very raw that they were trying to create. That's why the sound as well, if you listen to old Norwegian black metal, true Norwegian black metal, as fans like to call it, it has this very abysmal sound, the sound that reminds you of primordial beginnings or something like that. It's very raw and non-defined, and that was made with a purpose. It was, like I said, a very anti-modern tendency. But then at some point, Norse mythology started to kind of like replace this whole satanic imagery, and they replaced it with Norse mythology, and it was really it was something that was to be expected, because Scandinavia. So how can you express an identity that is anti-modern, but at the same time that doesn't really fall into these stereotypes of being satanic, and trying to build something new at the same time? You use Norse mythology, and this actually started out with the band Bathory. I think it was actually he was, because one man band. He was among the first ones to actually use imagery, so both imagery in the artwork and in the lyrics. And then you have this whole development of the satanic imagery, but then more and more bands start to follow the example of Bathory, and they try to build their identity using Norse mythology. And it's the way they approach it can also be different. There are bands who resort to more stereotypical motifs, like, for example, Odin or Valkyries, Ragnarök. So again, all these militaristic motifs. But then there are also bands who try to be closer to the sources. There is one band from Germany, for example, Falkenbach. I think it's a one person band as well. And I really enjoyed when noticing that some of the lyrics are taken actually quite direct from the Eddic poetry. So there is this tendency with some bands of actually recovering the past in an artistic way without falling into these stereotypes. But I would say, generally speaking, I think that was the conclusion of my thesis as well, when tackling such myths and when trying to integrate them into new discourses, new myths start to approach. And regardless what bands you look at, you are going to notice, for example, the myth of the golden age, the myth of the hero. These myths that are actually kind of resemblant to what was being done in the 19th century Romanticism. They're essentially creating a performative identity in the sense that they're showing it on stage, an identity of the archaic warrior who is, trying to be very dominant and present and trying to be different and trying to fight against the world or something like that. So it is a quest for identity, and these bands manage to create their own cultural identity by using and reusing these myths over and over again.
Yeah, and we can say that this image of a strongest man and the lyrics that using about dragons powerful and like examples, we saw lyrics that are inspired by aspect like Valhalla, like
Yeah,
Guardian,
yeah,
and we
very
saw that
common.
in many bands. We can say that they are an inspiration from others, that they came from to these aspects that are generated, or people that using this for bad purpose, like neo-Nazist concepts. These
Mm.
bands are in some point provocative to the from this product they are generated.
There are lots of gray zones here. Yeah, yeah. There are lots of gray zones, and there is a useful concept we can integrate here, which is that of reflect. No, sorry, what was it? Reflective anti-reflexivity. Oh my god, I don't remember it. So first, you have the idea of transgression. I'll come back to the other idea a bit later. First, we have the idea of transgression in the sense that there are some bands who just use this imagery because it forms part of the shock culture. So you want to draw on this image of being extreme. So you're basically taking stuff from the past that it's bad stuff. It has been misused and instrumented in all kinds of wrong ways, but you're still going to use it because it's part of this whole extreme image that you've created for yourself. And it's also one of the building blocks of metal music in general, like showing that you're different. And then reflexive anti-reflexivity was the concept. So again, this is very much related to the idea of transgression, in the sense that you tend to recycle such topics in the hope that you are going to kind of like recover them, or making them more approachable from the point of view of your own musical identity. But the gray zone remains. You are aware of it, but you don't really take it seriously, in the sense that you're rather focused on building your image, no matter what that means. So in this sense, you're allowed to use those images for your own myth making. Ambiguity and controversy are part and parcel of this culture. Yeah, so the use of Norse myth can overlap with controversial, radical discourses, and it does echo some very bad instrumentations of the past in folkish ideologies, National Socialism, and so on. But for some bands, for many bands, it remains an artistic and escapist endeavor. So they really like to play with these themes of transgression.
Oh, it's very interesting that, because we saw that they don't have guilt in this type of people that using their music and for bad purpose, because we saw that the lyrics are about in an epidemic, but people sometimes use this to explain some actions and say, oh, the Vikings are very strongful and powerful, and this is a thing that was very, very different. And can you explain for people of here in the channel what is the movement of the black metal and how they are, how can I say, how they have some importance for the Norwegian culture and in many aspects. Since they have the bad side, but I think they have the good side, like with the music and about that.
Yeah, black metal, yeah, in the Norwegian case, had most definitely a very important part in building a sort of Norwegian self-identification and Norwegian self-image, nationalistic self-image. Yeah, for example, in Norwegian textbooks nowadays, you can find some of the most well-known Norwegian bands. So I can remember from my Norwegian for Foreigners book, I did have pictures of Dimmu Borgir in the book, which was quite fun to see. So yeah, first of all, it has to do with the topics they approach. Topics related to the ancient Nordic past, but it very much goes beyond that. So bands such as Enslaved, for example, they tend to use on their artwork a lot of images of Norwegian nature, a lot of paintings by Norwegian painters, and generally they also use Norwegian language. They also use nynorsk, like the dialectal variety of Norwegian. I think all of this converges into the idea of reinforcing the national past, or the way yeah, the way Norway perceives itself as a nation, which is a bit strange, because black metal started out as this very subversive, anti-everything movement, and it ended up falling in the mainstream because it enforces some national ideas that were already present. It started out as a countercultural space. It started out as very deviant, as very liminal, and it ended up creating this northerness. It constructed some sort of dangerous otherness represented by society, humanity, Christianity, and everything else. But then it ended up being very much in accordance with representations of Norwegian nationalism, ranging from language to nature to Norse mythology and Norse myth, art, religion, and so on. So it is partly carnivalesque. It's partly like a carnival of celebration, celebrating the past, celebrating religion in an aesthetic way. But then it also recovers this whole romanticized idea about Norway as being this wonderful country, and so on. I think language plays a very important part here. A lot of bands do tend to resort to native languages and dialects in Norway, and by that they tend to reinforce their identity. So a lot of stuff is recovered from what is classically considered to belong to Norwegian national identity.
And we have from since the past and since the 90s, we have the two types of music that are completely different. We saw that in classical music. Example, we have the Die Nibelung, and we have the Nibelung Rings that was from Richard Wagner, and we have some aspects in nowadays that was related to the pagan metal. That was a new type of genre that think only in aspects of Viking Age, like bands like Amon Amarth and many other bands that are in this definition. What we can say about this new movement and what they are trying to do with this type of music music compositions, and that was using this useful of the Viking Age, because they changed some characteristics, and now we have the new folk, new pagan folk, and many, or they are only one thing, you just change the name in some aspects. How we can say about that?
So you're referring to Viking metal as a genre, what we can, how we can
Yeah,
approach it.
yeah, because we
Mhm.
have new conceptions nowadays about of useful of the Viking. We have now the pagan metal, the new
Yeah.
classifications from this type, and what we can say about this new generation of bands that they use in this
I don't know what you mean by
concept.
new generation of generations of bands.
Yeah,
But if you mean bands like Amon Amarth, then I can say something about that. Yeah, so well, Viking metal started out as a thematic subgenre of extreme metal, and I think one important part is that it's not really defined sound-wise, like musically. It's just defined lyrically. It's as you have lyrical content, and then you have also the visual aesthetics. Extensively focusing on Norse mythology and the Viking Age. The aesthetics, well, I mean by that either the artwork, or merchandise, or the way the bands tend to appear on stage. So it's a lyrical genre. It focuses very much on pre-Christian, specifically Nordic themes, also history and folklore. Yeah, regarding history, whatever is also very anti-Christian, and some of them also tend to resort quite directly to older texts, such as the Poetic Edda. But then the themes, or at least as far as I have noticed, the themes tend to be quite stereotypical as well. Again, the myth of the warrior, ancestry, the golden age, the northern location, and this whole idea of the decline of the contemporary world and the regeneration, which is only possible by resorting to the ancient past, which sounds very much like what the Romantics said. That's why I usually think about it as a romantic movement. So yeah, I don't know how to develop this further. It has quite an escapist nature to it, and it makes very heavy use of Nordic heritage, or what is perceived as Nordic heritage, in order to construct a musical identity. I think we can also classify it as some sort of symbolic northerness, the idea of an imagined community connected to this type of idealized past. And I say idealized past because yeah, there is a very big difference between, for example, scholarly discourse. There has been quite a lot of work done on Viking identity, for example, lately, and we generally tend to regard it as being rather fragmented. And at any rate, it was not a unified thing. It was not, the Viking world was not a unified world. At any rate, it was much more diverse and much more complex. But in this type of reimagining, you're really focusing on this unified community spawning out of the ancient past that you can use as some sort of escapism, or perhaps also a model of some sort, a dream vision also. So they essentially focus very much on an idealized version of history, and it's shaped by selecting memories about the past. This is called mythopoesis. Mythopoesis, I think, is a very good term to describe what they're doing. This is a narrative reimagining of traditional Norse sources to create new myths, to reshape heritage, and to construct a specific memory that is at the same time a resource for an artistic identity. Don't know if I answered the question.
yeah, you answered the question. Is fantastic, because we
Invented
saw.
tradition. It's a sort of invented tradition. Yeah.
Yeah, and we saw in many inspiration from the sagas and Edda stories. We saw example bands like Manea. They use
Yeah.
many aspects of the saga. The last album that they released was about the Englinga saga, and I think, oh, it's
Yeah.
fantastic, because it's stories that people sometimes don't know, but they used with
Mhm.
this in music was amazing. And for my last question, I saw that you make a work about the tale of Volsi, and about the practices and rituals in that. Can you explain a little about this your work? I think is about
It's a
is
class. Yeah, it's not a work; it's a class. I'm just offering a class with an association for historical education. Yeah, it's going to be about the Volsunga saga. It's going to be about the Volsunga saga because it's one of the main fornaldra sögur, so the sagas of the ancient past from Icelandic literature, and a lot of elements have been recovered and reused by all sorts of works of popular culture nowadays. Also, Tolkien was also fascinated with the saga, and there are a lot of elements in the saga which may also be somewhat related to the more ancient past. For example, the concept about fate. This is something I'm really interested in. The way fate is represented in these works, and the Volsunga saga, so like I said, tries to recover or at least approach some of these potentially older themes. The second part of the Poetic Edda, for example, is comprised of heroic poetry, which also deals with the Volsung cycle. So it's a cycle that definitely was very popular. It was also popular on continental. In continental Germanic traditions, and I think it's very rich in themes and potentially older Germanic traditions. And I don't know if you want me to give a couple of examples. Tolkien got his inspirations from the saga. We have the idea of the magic sword. We have the idea of the dwarves, who are these great smithies forging magical objects. We also have ideas related to the complicated family relationships, and we also have quite a lot of mythological representations. We find not only Odin, Loki, and Hönir wreaking havoc throughout the saga, but we also find this general feeling of the supernatural very much present in the saga, and the whole story of Sigurd. Also inspired quite a lot of subsequent stories, because it's your kind of like your typical story of the tragic Germanic hero. He's a hero who is much loved by Odin at the beginning, like his father Sigmund before him, but then he goes through all these steps to prove his worth, and he eventually has to gain the Valkyria Brynhildr, which he does, but not for himself, but for Gunnar. And then the saga eventually shows how he becomes the great dragon slayer, the Fofnisbani. So yeah, the dragon, another element Tolkien was very fascinated with, and then the hero eventually succumbs following a curse. Speaking of fate, and you can actually find his whole story prophesized by his own uncle, not in the saga, but in a poem called Gripispor, and when you read the poem, you're going to be wondering about how these people could actually live, because Sigurd, he knows that he is going to die from the very beginning. It doesn't come as a surprise to anyone. However, there seems to be kind of like this fatalistic attitude on the one hand, like, okay, yeah, I'm going to die. Yeah, that's that. You prophesized it. There's nothing I can do about it. But at the same time, it also offers you like this kind of feeling of liberty, because the whole process of how you're going to get there, here you can like you can choose some things. You can choose how to walk on this road, although the road is definitely going to take you where it's supposed to. So this tension between the concept of fate and the idea of choosing your battles, more or less. I find it fascinating in the saga, and generally speaking, in the whole of Norse literature.
Well, fantastic. I read it and I saw that was have points of rituals in the saga, and I think, oh, that's amazing that you have this discussion about this saga. And for one last question, just for our finish, in your opinion, how much we will have the ideas of Norse mythology in some future? You will be seeing Vikings with this popularity forever. We saw that one day Vikings will not anymore in this high
So you want me to
popularity.
make a prophecy myself? I'm very good at that. Yeah, I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. Just yeah, by scrolling a little bit online and on Amazon as well, I can see a lot of historical novels, for example, a lot of historical novels inspired by the Viking past. I think they're quite popular because there's quite a lot of them. And there is an abundance of material online, which is again both a blessing and a curse, because most of it is not really of high quality. But to answer your question, yeah, I definitely think it's going to continue to be one of those topics that continue to fascinate us and to make us determine us to engage with it, hopefully in more creative ways than what has been done so far. I mean, I would really like to see at least the myth of the warrior. I would like to see how we outgrow it, because there is so much more about the Viking Age that we could explore, that it's really, really a shame that we're kind of like stuck in these stereotypes for such a long time.
Yeah, I think it would be fantastic if this never how can I say, never finished, because Vikings are a fantastic topic, and we saw that they are high in every time of every society. We have this topic in searched by many people in many different areas, and I will be in the next position that this is not end, because have many things that we will learn about that.
Yeah, well, we like
And
them nowadays. I'm not very sure how much Europeans in the 9th century like them.
yes, that's true. And Irina, thank you so much for doing this interview for the channel. It
My
was a
pleasure.
pleasure meeting you. I love your PhD thesis about the heavy metal and the Vikings, and this is fantastic. I am metal lover too, and I really appreciate your work
Thank you very much.
from your research. It's amazing. Thanks
Thank
so
you so
much
much.
for
My
this
pleasure.
interview. I will just stop the recording.